Welcome boys and girls, Costin here with my Empire Army Guide for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, talking about the units you should be using during the course of the campaign, and really what kind of situation you want to use them in, because the Empire has a great variety of troops. When we're thinking about cavalry, when we're thinking about ranged units, when we're thinking about siege engines, really, there are choices to be made as the Empire. So, at Tier 1, the only unit that I would say is really worth recruiting are Spearmen with Shields. They have decent enough leadership, as well as decent enough line holding capability. So they have charge reflection and charge defense versus large, as well as a 15 bonus versus large, so they will be able to protect the flanks of your army. Their armor is not great, and one of the problems that you will encounter in quite a few Imperial campaigns is that, or any campaign where you're using a hybrid melee ranged army, is that the melee units, the melee infantry units, typically will take more damage. But Spearmen with Shields are very cheap and very disposable as units, and that's kind of their main benefit, really. They're decent enough as line holders. They do a good job. They afford that particular role given their cost. So I would dare say they're worth using pretty much in every single Imperial campaign. In fact, I would use them more than regular spearmen in a campaign as well. Like that 42 melee defense is quite a decent amount. Their melee attack and melee damage is obviously not great. Then we have another tier 1 unit. We have Pistoliers, and while Pistoliers are not a unit you want to use throughout the course of your campaign, when you're looking at stuff to recruit very early on, yeah, you have Spearmen with Shields, but then you also have Pistoliers, and the value proposition of these guys is, while again they don't have scalability, they can fire while moving, so they can harass a bunch of enemy forces when you're going into a battle, and they can just run around, get a portion of the enemy army to engage them, to follow them, to pursue them. And that's really their main value point in a campaign. I would not go too hard on Pistoliers. Like 4 of them is really the good amount that I would use during the course of, or 4 is the amount I would get for a particular army, though you may want to consider how quickly you're going to replace them with Outriders, because Outriders are the better unit from my perspective. And then we talk about tier 2, right? So you don't obviously have Outriders, but you may also want to get Handgunners. So Handgunners, decent enough range units, armor-piercing weapon damage, decent enough range. Obviously, gunpowder units do have that problem of needing line of sight in order to be effective, but when you're using handgunners, you kind of want to put them in the middle, and then what I usually do is, what I usually do with a force is, you know, I put my heroes and my lords in front of them, because they are going to be more capable of firing than, you know, if you try and put an infantry unit behind them, even if it's only partially, right, like something like this. Their line of sight is going to matter quite a bit. Alternatively, you do have crossbowmen. They don't have the armor-piercing weapon damage, so that is one factor you got to consider with regards to these guys. But they do have better range, and they're not restricted in the same way as handgunners are in terms of their firing capability. So that's the main value point of crossbowmen early on in a campaign if you want to get them. Then we have mortars. So mortars, generally speaking, you only want to recruit them very quickly, very early on in a campaign when you just don't have any other artillery unit. The problem is that mortars don't do a great amount of damage in a lot of situations, because the AI can avoid their shots, and their shots are not necessarily the most accurate things in the world. So mortars are more of a situation, oh, I just want to recruit an artillery unit, and mortars are available, and that's the thing. Keep in mind, friendly fire, just worth pointing out, because you can take quite a bit of friendly fire from your own units. General-wise, you have really 3 choices, and it depends on what you're going to look to buff. Do you want to buff your range units and also your artillery and eventually get the steam tank on your lord? Go for Master Engineer. You get restock. You also get a bunch of useful abilities. Besides, the Master Engineer can do a good amount of damage with that grenade launcher in short range, but obviously you're going to be lacking the melee capability. Alternatively, you can go with the General of the Empire, and the value proposition of a General of the Empire is obviously dueling capability, but more importantly, he will get the flying mount. So, you know, you're looking at a Griffin eventually on him, and he does get a bunch of skills that are going to be useful for your army. Or if you don't really necessarily care about either having a steam tank or a Griffin, you can go with an Arch Lector. So the Arch Lector gives your melee units 24 melee attack, which is pretty damn useful with Imperial infantry, but the main real value proposition is he's pretty durable when you think of the fact he has Grand Shield of Faith, and then he has Grand Soulfire. And what I would say is quite valuable with Grand Soulfire is that it's not a spell, so you're not using Winds of Magic in a battle. So you can use the Arch Lector abilities and Warrior Priest abilities, by the way, without worrying about the Winds of Magic situation. It's just a cooldown effect. And here's a great thing. If you're playing an Imperial campaign, typically you're going to want to maximize either your flanking capability with cavalry or your range capability with your handgunners, crossbowmen, artillery. And this is what an Arch Lector can do. He can just charge into the middle of an enemy army, get them to tar pit him, and then your range units can come in and just do a lot of damage. And he's not so easy to kill, especially when you're talking about him being on foot. He won't do the best in terms of dueling, but his role is to disrupt the enemy force, and that's the reason Arch Lectors can be valuable. Personally, I do prefer going Master Engineers a lot of the time, just because building up that steam tank capability. It's also the trait situation, though, yeah, Arch Lectors in general in the Empire are pretty useful as well. For a mid-game army, you're looking at something like this that you may want to recruit. So you have Outriders, and the benefit of Outriders is obviously they have much greater range than Pistoliers, and that makes them a very valuable unit. So you have firing while moving, Vanguard deployment, all that, and the main value proposition really with Outriders compared to Pistoliers, many times when you're dealing with an enemy army in a campaign, if you're attacking, unless they have overwhelming strength, they might not want to move towards you. Well, if you send Outriders forward, and keep in mind what you're usually facing, Greenskins, Skaven potentially, Warriors of Chaos with Festus, Vampire Counts, all that. Most of the time, with those foes, you will be able to get in there with Outriders and not really take a significant amount of damage. Be aware of Direwolves. Don't think that Direwolves can't do a ton of damage to your Outriders, so be concerned about that, and of course enemy cavalry. But usually speaking, 2 to 4 Outriders are just generally speaking quite useful to have in an army. Then we have Greatswords. So Greatswords are not a great unit. Like Karabor Greatswords, different discussion, but when we're talking about Greatswords, yes, they do have most of their damage, armor-piercing weapon damage. They have that bonus source to the infantry, but most of the time when I'm thinking about an Empire army, what the kind of things they're going to be dealing with, I just don't think Greatswords are going to be able to do their job as effectively as one might think. Obviously, you still want to recruit them because they're your best infantry, but yeah, this is where the Teutonen Guard with the End Times DLC will really come in handy. Spearman with Shield is still worth using for flank protection, but one of the units, the Electric Count units that I really think is worth discussing, and the most important one, are the Eldred's Guard. So they're much better spearmen with shields. The benefit, really, there's two benefits. One, they get 70 armor, so their durability as a unit is significantly higher as a result of that. And they'll also perform better in auto-resolve, which, when you're playing a longer campaign, that is something that I consider an important factor. Then you have cannons. So with cannons, primary reason you're bringing them is for the sake of sieges, though don't underestimate their damage, you know, that kind of armor-piercing weapon damage. But yeah, in terms of open field battles, they're not necessarily... You're not bringing these guys necessarily for open field battles, though dependent on what you're dealing with. Like, you know, you think about Treekin, for instance, to some extent, though they're going to have some problems with regards to that. But yeah, mostly for sieges, which can be quite a few of them. Then we have Null Ironsides, the principal ranged unit you want to recruit as the Empire. How many of them? You know, some people go heavily on a ranged army and just try and eradicate the opponent before they reach their lines. That can work, though keep in mind, when it works, it's brilliant. When it doesn't work, it can destroy you. At least 4 of them, though, can be great. They do have that black powder discipline, so that increases their accuracy and reload skill, so they will be able to deal a significant amount of damage, especially when, you know, when you're looking at that 35 missile strength and, you know, armor piercing capability. That is going to allow them to destroy a lot of enemy units before they close the gap. And they're also decently durable, though obviously don't expect them to win in melee, though. Yeah, it's kind of hilarious how bad a lot of infantry units of the Empire can be in terms of their stats when you think about, like, Null Ironsides. Seriously, like, Null Ironsides, the joke is, like, Null Ironsides can hold their own okay-ish, I guess, in melee. Though obviously not against any, you know, similar to your melee unit. But, you know, if someone flanks them, don't underestimate that. And then you have your specialist range units, the Hockland long rifle. So they have snipe, which allows them to remain hidden while firing. You know, if you put these guys in woods, they'll do quite well. Yeah, they're your Jezzails. Though, to be fair, Jezzails are just the much more durable unit. These guys rely a bit on stealth, so it depends on whether or not you can keep them hidden. Keep in mind, with gunpowder units and range units of the Empire in general, it's not just about their baseline stats, it's also the kind of skills that you can get. You know, you consider heroes, you consider master engineer, all that. Then we have the cavalry discussion. So there's 3 types of cavalry you can go for, really. I would not bother with Empire Knights pretty much in any campaign. Your general purpose cavalry are Reichsguard, so bronze shield, 120 armor, good leadership, good speed for heavy cavalry, lacking armor piercing, but a pretty good all-rounder cavalry unit, and you want to use these guys especially as Karl France. And then we have the Knights of the Blazing Sun. So my personal preference is between Reichsguard and Knights of the Blazing Sun. I prefer to go with Knights of the Blazing Sun. So you get flaming attacks, which can be useful, especially when you're thinking about undead, and they have a higher charge bonus as well as that spell resistance capability. So these guys really are great against undead units, but usually they will do very well as shock cavalry, so that's the main value proposition with these guys. And then we have Knights of the Black Rose. The way these guys work, they're not shock cavalry. They're not the kind of cavalry that you want to have running around just trying to do cycle charges, though you can definitely go for that if you want to. Their main value proposition compared to Knights of the Blazing Sun and Reichsguard is they're just better in a straight-up melee fight. So you think about questing knights, for instance, as well as several other cavalry units. That's the role Knights of the Black Rose have. They have that 120 armor, good leadership, really good melee defense, and good weapon strength with also that bonus versus infantry. So these guys are meant to really hold the line in a battle. In fact, you might even use them instead of your infantry to protect your flanks and all that against enemy units, or make them your front line, though obviously that comes with the problem that with gunpowder units, having something obstruct your line side, the cavalry will definitely do so. It's not strictly the most ideal decision. What about huntsmen? What about other electrocount state troopers? I think in general, with like with regiments of the renown, let's go with that first. I usually prefer to keep regiments renown in reserve. Obviously, they're all worth using because you can recruit them wherever, and they just have better stats. So why wouldn't you use them? But I prefer to keep them as an emergency force. With electrocount state troopers, I think, you know, obviously the mortars are useful, the steam tank is useful, but the only unit I really care about to mass a lot, like, you know, steam tank, obviously pretty good, but the only unit of the electrocount state troopers I think is really, really valuable are the Eldred's Guard. That's my perspective. Though again, using all of them, except maybe some of the cavalry units, but using the electrocount state troopers when you get them is worth it in every campaign. When talking about a more late-game Imperial army, you do have to consider the steam tanks that Master Engineers can use, and of course, we should talk about the hero situation. All Imperial heroes are worth using for various reasons. The Witch Hunter, he's not really great from a combat perspective, but he will debuff an enemy target by quite a significant amount, and that's pretty useful when you're dealing with, say, someone like Vlad von Karstein, or you're talking about the various, you know, warriors of chaos that you might be dealing with by that point, or even Gorbat, really, if he becomes a nuisance. But yeah, just in general, being able to debuff an enemy target is pretty useful. Engineers, campaign movement range, various skills that make them very, very good to have for an Imperial army, especially restock when we're talking about that, or just their damage capability. Interestingly, that mechanical speed does make them somewhat durable, though not really the most durable heroes you can have. Warrior Priest, so you get a Shield of Faith, you do get Soulfire, you do get Hammer of Sigmar. Not as good as an Arch-Lector, but of course you can have as many of them as you want, and casualty replenishment is a pretty important thing. Imperial captains give you flexibility on the battlefield because they can get flying mounts on Pegasus, and they're pretty decent from a combat perspective as well as various skills they have. And then mages, there's a lot of schools of magic with the Empire. Personally, I am a big fan of shadow magic, but honestly, there's a time and place for every single school of magic. Like a light mage, for instance, with their baseline spell can do quite good amount of single target damage with that bolt spell that they have. And another thing to consider with different types of wizards is the kind of skills they also provide for an army. So for instance, the Celestial Wizard, Heaven's Magic, may not be the best school of magic in the world, but they can give you a bit of extra campaign movement range. So, you know, if you're playing Gelt especially, you do want that. Then we have Demigryphs. So really, in a late game scenario, you're going to want to use Demigryphs regardless of which type you're going to go for. With the exception of perhaps, you know, some Electrocount State Troopers and maybe, you know, Regiments right now, we're not talking about that. So, yeah, you do have two variants. You have the Halberd version and the Lance version. What's the difference between the two of them? Well, the Lance version has a shield. The Halberd version does not, so they're more survivable against enemy ranged attacks. And they also have a bit better melee stats. Though that's a bit, you know, misleading to some extent, because Demigryph halberds are your anti-cav. So when you're dealing with enemy fast movers, you are probably going to want to have Demigryphs with halberds, or you could just go with regular Demigryph knights as a general all-rounder unit. Honestly, the difference may not necessarily matter all that much in most situations, but when it does matter a lot. So, yeah, I'm a bigger fan of regular Demigryph Knights, unless, again, you're dealing with enemy Cav. You know, if you're, say, you've got yourself in a situation where you're up against Arbol for whatever reason, and he's bringing in a lot of Chaos Knights, then yeah, Demigryph Knights with Halberds are your choice. Then we have Outriders with grenade launchers. So what they gain versus what they lose. So when we're looking at regular Outriders, we look at their longer range, a bit longer range. Whereas with grenade launchers, they're not going to be as good against single targets as the regular Outriders, but they will do quite a bit of AoE damage with those grenade launchers and firing while moving, though that's a bit of a tricky proposition, to be quite honest, with regards to Outriders with grenade launchers, though they can't shoot against air targets. Yeah, firing grenades at air targets is apparently not a thing that works really well. Artillery-wise, you still want to use Grand Cannons for siege situations, and then of course Hellstorm rocket batteries to just annihilate enemy forces because of their significant amount of ranged damage. You can of course still use regular Outriders if you want to for that kind of skirmishing capability, though personally I do prefer having a solid infantry line of ranged units with maybe 2 grenade launchers to harass the enemy, and honestly, given the range of Hellstorm rocket batteries, you can probably bait the enemy quite well with them alone. I mean, cannons themselves are nothing to sneeze at, but yeah, just a bit extra range on Hellstorm rocket batteries. Now, as for your truly late game units that you may never really recruit in most campaigns, with the exception of the land ships, you have the Luminarch of Hysh to talk about first. So magical attacks, flaming attacks, a significant amount of range damage that they can do. But yeah, the amount of time it takes to actually charge that projectile and fire that projectile, and then of course the reload time, is fairly significant. You do reduce enemy power recharge. You do have damage resistance for allies in a 55-meter range. Luminarchs are good, but given the tier requirements, usually you won't see them in a campaign. But honestly, getting 1 or even 2 of them in an army is certainly not a waste of an army slot. Then we have land ships to talk about. So land ships, not the most durable of single entities. They can fire while moving, they're unbreakable, they have full power, so that gives them extra acceleration and speed in a fight. But usually speaking, with land ships, you kind of just want to have them shooting at an enemy from a distance. That is their main value proposition, especially with all the shooters around them. Like, put them behind your front line, or engage them if your front line is wavering, and let them do damage with all those guns that they're carrying. Then we have the steam tank discussion. So there's 2 variants of steam tanks. So you have volley guns and regular steam tanks. Usually speaking, I vastly prefer volley gun steam tanks. Just significantly more damage than a regular steam tanks, and otherwise they just have the same stats. It's just the question of what type of gun do you prefer to have on your steam tank, and I just think Hellblaster volley guns are, usually speaking, the much better unit, or the much better armament to have on a steam tank. Besides, I also think it just looks better than the regular steam tank, even though CA updated the model of the regular steam tank with Thrones Decay as well. But that's my perspective on the Imperial Army in Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires. Let me know what you guys think, and stay tuned for more.